We'll start with floats first, and it's probably easiest to understand how they work by taking a look at how images and text behave next to each other. So I've got a file with some images and text in it we can open up. I'll open up the tryout float images file, and of course we'll open it up in the browser first, and I'll open it up in my text application as well. If I take a look at our code, you can see that we have an image tag here right above a couple of paragraphs. And when we look at it in the browser, we can see that the image block is sitting above each one of the paragraph blocks, and of course, below the H1 block that we have up here at the top. Now, all of my blocks are behaving normally. They're sitting right on top of one another. But with float, what we can do is we can actually push an element or a block left or right on the page. Now, I've always wished that they called this feature push instead of float, but there is some floating that's going to go on. When you push an item, like this image, to the left or right-hand side of the page, the items below it in the code, which would be these two paragraphs here, will actually float up and fill up the space. So that's really where the name float comes from. Now let's try it out with this image right here. I'll go back to the code, and you can see we have a style block up here at the top. Since we've only got one image on the page, I'll just use the image tag for now. But obviously, if we had a lot more images, we might be needing to use a class selector. I'll create my image selector first. That's img. And we'll set up the braces for the style rules. And then we'll go ahead and set up the float property. And this first time, let's set it to left. I'll save my change. We'll go back to our page and refresh. And you can see now that the image hasn't moved. It's still on the left-hand side of the page. But what's different now is the text is now floating up to fill up the rest of the space. Now, obviously, we might want to use some margins and paddings that we learned in the last section, but I'm just going to worry about the wrapping for now. Let's try a right float. We'll just go back to our code, and we'll change the value on the float property to right. I'll save that change, and we'll update our page once more. Now you can see this time the element was pushed to the right, and then the text was allowed to float up on the other side. Now floats will never affect code that appear before it inside the page, so our H1 tag won't move at all. And we can test out the way that that works by just moving our image tag around. I'm going to go back to our code. I'll select that image tag, and I'm just going to cut it out of the position underneath the H1 tag, and we'll go and place it in between the two paragraph tags. We still have the float right turned on. I'll save that change. We'll go back and take a look at it. We'll refresh the page. And now you can see that the first paragraph is sitting exactly where it was, and it doesn't have any relationship with the picture at all. And now the picture is pushed to the right, and only the second paragraph will float up next to it. Now that we have a basic idea of what float does, let's take a look at what the clear property does. Basically, the way to use clear is you can set it on any block that you don't want to float. In our example here, the only block that we can actually float is the second paragraph. So let's go back and change things around. I can't really use a paragraph tag selector here since I have two paragraphs. So let's go down to our second paragraph and let's give it a class name. I'll set up class equals, and I'll call this one clear photo. Close up the quotes, and now we of course need to make our clear photo style. So we'll go up to the style tags, and I'll add a little space here for it. Of course, our class selector definitions always start with a dot, and followed by the name clear photo. We'll add the braces. And for this style, I'm going to add a clear property. Now the clear property is interesting. What you're going to set up on it is which sides or which floats that you want to be able to clear. In our case, our document has a right float, so I could specify that I wanted to clear that right one by just specifying right for the value. I'll save my change. We'll go back up here and refresh the page, and you can see that now, instead of wrapping, that paragraph is fixed from floating by the clear setting that we made, and it's clearing all elements that are floated to the right.